Hey addicts, welcome back. We're here to talk about The Walking Dead, which I never thought we'd be back to talk about The Walking Dead because to me, with the last issue, I kind of wrote it off as dead, but I heard that this was going to be the last issue of the entire series, and you know, I've been invested this for this long, for this many years, so I figured if this truly is the end, I gotta at least see how they wrap it up. So with that being said, we're going to dive into this issue. We're going to do a brief recap. I've already recorded this once and my recap was a little too long. The issue is 72 issues, so you know, it's significantly extended. It's about maybe a quarter, halfway through a volume. So I'm going to try to shorten it up a lot more, and so we can get kind of more of the opinions and have more of a discussion of the ending for the series. So with that being said, I'm just going to state it right here, you know, your spoiler warning. 3, 2, 1, okay. This is opening up directly with a time skip. In the first couple pages, you may not know it because we see a farmhouse with a walker approaching it, but as soon as the walker is dispatched with Michonne's sword, wielded by an older Carl, you definitely get confirmation that this is a time skip. We get to see an older, much older Carl. I would say Carl looks about the same age as maybe Rick when he died, so maybe around 20 years, or give or take, you know, a couple, for this time skip. We get to see that, you know, Carl was with Sophia, they have a daughter, which that's big news right off the bat, but more importantly, we get to see the reaction to seeing a walker is very different. You know, it's almost like they hadn't seen a walker in forever, so that's kind of giving the subtlety that, you know, hey, you know, seeing these things is kind of like the day of the past. You know, they are in a new era. So obviously, Carl is suspecting it, inspecting it, and that leads to him going to be going into town, which we get to see. I believe they have confirmation that this is Hilltop. And the first thing you see is this kind of like traveling carriage that says, see The Walking Dead. It's like a show carriage. And man, Glenn, we get to see his baby Herschel all grown up. And I think he'd be rolling around in his grave if he saw how his son turned out, because he is a grade A douche. But we get to see, you know, Carl and Herschel have some interactions. It turns out Herschel has this show that he has walkers, and he, you know, travels around showing them off to people for entertainment, and he let one loose, and, you know, obviously Carl interacts with it, and he was like, oh great, I'm glad you found it, did you get it for me? And he's like, no, I killed it. And he's like, you what? And so we get to see Herschel is pretty upset about it, and he threatens to have the sheriff come after him, which Carl is like, he knows where to find me. You know, we kind of, you know, flash forward a little bit, you get to see Carl with his family and the sheriff coming after him and telling him that, hey, we're gonna have to issue some kind of punishment, or at least address this issue. So you get to see that Carl's pretty upset about it, as you could probably imagine, because they label walkers as property. How insane is that? But that just goes to show how much the world has changed. The issue does jump around a lot, so you know, I'm gonna skip over some of this, but you do get to see like Earl, him being much older. Obviously that was his mentor for blacksmithing. You get interaction between that. You get to see some more insight with Carl living with his family, noticing the world in a different light, I guess. And then you get to see too that, you know, Carl opens up a little bit about his dad as well. Eventually we get to the trial. Herschel and Carl are, you know, open to state their case, and after some consideration, the judge is about to give her verdict when Maggie walks in the door, and we get confirmation that she is actually the ruler of all of the conjoined communities. They call her Madam President, believe it or not. But when you first see her, you can tell something is a little off, because for one, she still has white guards around her, but you know, she tells the judge a little something, gets Carl off the hook, at least kind of alluding to that. Still a compromise, if you will, but we get to see that Carl interacts with Maggie. And Maggie seems like the old Maggie at first, but we get to see she's kind of, lost her vision in a sense, and Carl kind of calls her out for it. We even have Sophia making a great deal of like, hey, you need to watch what you're doing, or else you're going to have another Sebastian Milton on your hands. And it's like, yeah, my brother, everybody thinks he's the dick. But I like that. Flash forward a little bit more, we get to see that Carl is thinking about the whole situation, and he's going to go out and clear his head for a little bit. And then the next day, Herschel finds that all of his walkers for his showing entertainment thing has been killed, and he's pretty pissed about it. But Carl is skipping town. He's going on his run and speedily trying to get out of there because that's his job. He's a messenger and a delivery guy, I guess you could say. But you get to see that he actually ends up meeting up with Lydia, which, yeah, that whole part is a little weird, or at least when you first see it, just because it's like, oh, he's with Sophia, yet Lydia's still alive. Okay. Regardless of that, you get to see Lydia and him have an interaction. And, Carl kind of tells her about the situation and tells her that, we're still going to do our runs regardless of the fact, and then face the consequences later. We even get to see Carl stop by Negan's house where he's staying at. We don't see Negan, but, we get alluding that, hey, he's still around. That leads into seeing a lot of the different areas that they have cleared and have become safe, him stopping and talking with other characters as he gives them stuff. But we don't see any of the old characters for the most part. It's mainly just alluding to them or maybe hearing about what happened. Like I said, you get a little bit more of them noticing about the environment and how it's a little changed or recessed back to how it was, maybe when the colonies were first around. But then you get to see a little moment, it kind of slows down, and you have this interaction between Lydia and Carl where they're talking, kind of reminiscing a little bit about old days, and specifically like his eye wound and how, they used to interact in that nature. And then you get to see, obviously Carl has it covered up at this point, and he kind of goes into the reasoning of why that is, and it's for his daughter. But they're fast forward, they're still on the road. You get to see the train station, which it is working. Eugene, my boy, got it working. And you even see him interact with Eugene. They're dropping off stuff. Not much to say really there. He even has a run-in with Laura, which I'm sure you can realize that she had some choice words for him, and Carl kind of puts her in her place, or at least gets to have her shut up. They're making their way back. Lydia and Carl say goodbye, and Carl meets up with his family, but not for long, because the sheriff comes back and they're taking him into custody. And in fact, they're taking him to what they call their high court, and that is back in the main part of the Commonwealth, and they're going to put him for a hearing. And you get to see that the judge is in fact Michonne, and she is in charge, I guess, as like a supreme judge. So whatever she says goes. There's no jury. There's no lawyers involved. It's just the defendant, I guess, and then her, and then she gets to decide. But she lets him state his case again. Hearing his side of the story. Michonne even has a part where she talks about her stance on the issue. We even have a moment where she actually quotes what's engraved on a statue outside, and that is actually the back of the compendium or the volume, that little speech thing, if you guys read it. That's what she says, and then, adds her take. Her sentence is basically that she's not going to charge Carl, and she's actually going to make it a law that you can't have walkers as entertainment, or they're not allowed in the safe zone. So, and that's basically what Carl wanted, is, because it doesn't make any sense having the enemy right there, or that danger right there. But after the trial, you get to see Michonne and Carl interact, which, she kind of has a nice moment with him. You get to see kind of like an older Michonne, or at least not her bitchy side that you saw in the last arc. But you get to see as well that, she's kind of grown and accepted a lot of the stuff that's happened in the story, and she's kind of grown from it. You get one last interaction with Carl and Herschel, which I think this is only to kind of maybe justify Herschel's actions. I think it's still pretty obvious that he's in the wrong, but just get a little bit more of an insight, even if it's a little twisted, you can kind of relate to it. But then towards the end, we get to see Sophia and Carl walking out of the court area. There's some kids there, and they're kind of hassling Carl until one of them says, "Hey, do you know who that is?" And then kind of apologize for the rest as they walk off. And Carl and Sophia kind of have a reminiscing, or just not a reminiscing, but a conversation of wow, it's not going to be long before nobody knows about the trials, which is the era that they call this epidemic. But we get to see that the statue that they were next to is of Rick, which it's kind of cool seeing Rick immortalized in a statue, if I'm perfectly clear, or if I'm perfectly honest. But Carl does have a good point, saying wow, they really exaggerated a little bit about his stance, and it's I don't think his dad would want that, or something to that effect. You just get his internal opinion on it as they're walking away. But the issue ends with Carl back home with his family. He gets a little talk with Sophia until he's interrupted by his daughter, and his daughter wants to read a story, which the story is basically a summary of Rick's life and his journey through the series. And as he's kind of reading this story, you get little images of some of the other characters. You get to see Maggie and Herschel again. You get to see Jesus and Aaron. You get to see Negan at the grave of Lucille. You get to see Mercer and the princess, Lydia and her new man, Magna and Yumiko, even Eugene again. And I forgot, they showed the prick that killed Rick. Gosh. But yeah, you get to even see them dumbasses in there. But eventually he ends the story, and his daughter's read it again, and it ends with the image of Carl and his daughter sitting in a rocking chair together. After that, you get probably a 3 or 4 page letter to the fans from Kirkman as kind of feeling like an apology more so, but it's more of a telling of his insight of what, how he feels about the series and why it led to this and stuff like that. Before I get into that though, I will say this issue was surprisingly well written. I did like the ending, as much as that's hard for me to admit because of how frustrated I've been for the last 2 arcs, and I just absolutely hated how Rick went out. But I do like this story, or this ending. There is, though, a lot of stuff that, because of the way the last 2 arcs went and because of how sudden this is, there's some stuff that just it's gonna rub you the wrong way. I know it did me. Not saying this ending is perfect, I just think it's a decent ending. For instance, some of the gripes that I have with this issue is there's a lot of loose ends on storylines, with side characters or different communities and stuff like that, and you don't really get a satisfying ending to that. Another thing that's kind of unsatisfying is some of the relationships between characters. I mean, as you could probably tell in my just short recap there, Maggie and Herschel especially are one of these where it's just oh, that's so frustrating, especially since Maggie is one of the biggest supporters, or was one of the biggest supporters of Rick, and having that undying loyalty to him, just to see her get to that point where she's not, is not so much even caring, about some of the safety of the communities. It's just, it's frustrating. But, it is what it is, I suppose. I will say some of the characters that I did like or respected kind of Kirkman's approach. Negan, I did like that he didn't show him except for one little still at the end, just kind of confirming he's still around. But I'm glad we didn't touch on Negan at all, because I think his ending previously was already good enough. Carl, I did like seeing Carl all grown up. Carl's one, though, that I will say is just a completely unutilized character, so it's sad to see that we didn't get more of him, to really build him up. But I think where Kirkman shows he ended up is still relatively okay. Michonne is another one that I think is, at this point, it's probably necessary because Michonne has probably had more of an impact on the story than Carl has. I mean, Carl, at least, you know, since we haven't seen much of him, or he hasn't gotten much development, he's not going to have as much resounding impact about telling his story. I don't know. Maybe that's wrong to say. Yeah, you know what? Scratch that, because I guess, you know, Carl does have a, you know, an impactful part of telling his story. But I don't know, because of him being younger, I guess maybe it just doesn't connect with the reader because he wasn't as involved with everything going on. So seeing that little part with Michonne, I did like how they summed that up, and I'm just glad they didn't, you know, make her a bitch completely. The other thing I guess I'll talk about with addressing with this little letter that Kirkman does, Kirkman tells kind of a sad story about, you know, why he felt like this was the end and why, you know, he couldn't think of anything, which you know, I'm not to say it isn't a possibility that happened, because I can completely understand if you're writing a story with this many characters and trying to do it for this long, there's just some stuff that you're not going to be able to come up with to make it unique and fresh every single time. But at the same time, I kind of feel his genuineness is hard to believe, especially seeing that he's just like, I mean, even he says that he was like such a loss of like where to add stuff or like where to expand stuff. And I'm like, we clearly know he's an established writer, and, you know, he's proven himself as a capable writer. So just seeing him drop the ball in very obvious parts to me, it just seems hard to believe. Another thing that's kind of a hint to this is he makes mention of like he was worried about the compendium, like where to end because of the compendium, because he knows that most of the readers buy the compendiums, and so he didn't want people to feel like to buy, you know, like another issue or another couple volumes after the compendium to get the ending of the story, which I just call so much bullshit. I mean, that feels like an obvious, like, greedy market viewpoint of it. You know, it just feels like he cared more about the sales of compendiums rather than, you know, having a good fleshed out story. And, you know, even after the fact, seeing that the complete story doesn't even fit in compendiums, he's still going to have like another half volume, which is even more of a slap in the face, I think, because they're going to sell it as a volume price, even though it's probably not as big as a volume. So, you know, just seeing that, just kind of like, hey, you know, that rubs me the wrong way. And it just kind of seems to take out the sincerity of, you know, his love or compassion for this, for the series and the fans of it. But hey, you know, I can't say how the guy feels. You know, I'm not him, never talked to him. So, you know, what he says could be completely true. Maybe he just dropped the ball, but to me, it just, I'm not buying it. The one thing I'll say too is like, you know, it's like, could you imagine if they would have, or if he would have written like the Whispers, like expanded that out, like we had, like let's say not all the Whispers got killed. Obviously, like, you know, the Whisper War end, there was still Roman out there. Could you imagine if he didn't like bring Beta back and killed him right then and there, if they would have left gathered numbers? We saw the Commonwealth expanded, you know, more thought out, fleshed out, gave some more development for characters that severely needed it, had a better reasoning for Rick dying or a better lead up to that. And then, you know, after Rick dies, have Carl going back, you know, for the funeral. They do the funeral. Maybe, I don't like time skips. I didn't like it really in here. But, you know, maybe if they did add a time skip, you know, have it to where it's like maybe 2 or 3 years. And then they're trying to expand the railroad and they run into the Whispers again. Carl has to deal with the Whispers. That's finally the last enemy they have. And then, you know, it jumps forward and you get to see this. I don't know, like, even that little bit right there, Kirkman could have done so much with that. So it's just sad, you know, to see the obvious things not being done. I mean, even if, I mean, granted, it's like, you don't necessarily all the time want to do something that's obvious, but still, do something, man. Anything was better than that last 2 arcs. But anyway, I will say it just kind of proves that The Walking Dead couldn't survive without Rick. I think maybe eventually it could have, but just the way he did it, it's like, it kind of just feels like he kind of ate his words a little bit in the last one. I don't know. The ending for The Walking Dead, I think this is final. I don't think we'll ever see the continuation of this story because it just doesn't make sense the way he wrote it. I think it's kind of stupid to go back and kind of fill in the gap unless he follows Negan, which I don't think that's necessary either, but it's a possibility. But anyway, guys, I'm going to stop here because I'm running out on time on the camera. But yeah, this is the end. So I guess it's goodbye to The Walking Dead. Don't know how long the show will go. I'm sure movies or games will live on, but this is it for the characters that we know. So I'm interested to see what you guys thought, and let me know if you guys did end up liking some of the ending or if you thought it was complete garbage. I think I could take some things out of it that I did like.